If not, all right. So I'm going to welcome today Dr. McCaffrey, who's going to speak about creating citations. As you move through doing your research, I want to ensure that you're fully supported with every aspect of what you'll need to do. And so today we will have Rhonda move forward talking to you guys about this process, the idea of how to create citations for your own research.
All right. Good morning. It's nice to see you again. I have a question for you before we start, and that is, do you know which citation system you're using? Because they are different. So do any of you know? No? Do you know what I'm talking about?
That may be part of the conversation as
Okay.
well.
So why don't you tell me what field or what like subject, like uh, area of study you are working in, because that sometimes determines the citation system.
I'm in psychology, so that's the APA format, right?
Yeah, usually. Sometimes they use other scientific ones, but the basic one is APA 7. Yes.
I'm a biology major.
Okay. Then you are both APA. Okay. Is that all, or are there any others?
There's only the two here.
Okay.
There is another, and I believe she will also be APA, so I think that'll be
Okay.
good for
Okay.
her.
Great. So then we will do APA 7 citations, and I'll talk about summarizing, paraphrasing, and quoting and the difference for those, because there are differences, and I will like just throw in there right away that when it comes to um, um, choosing between the three of those, quoting is the least used, which I know that we all always like want to quote. At least I always did when I was in high school and then when I started college. And that is the least used. We want to try to stay away from that as much as possible. So we will talk about how you do citations. And one of the things that I want to say, um, let me just do presenter view here. Okay. Um, is that anytime you're asked to use a citation style, my number one advice is always have the reference book or the online reference with you and look it up, because you might think you remember how to do it and maybe you remember one thing incorrectly, or you might be mixing up two in your head. I've done that quite often before, and they do change, they update them. So it's always a good thing to look it up. APA 7 does have an online website. I don't have the right there, like right at with me at the time, but you Google it and they will find the online website for you. And I believe if you go in through the library, then you should be able to have access to the entire guide. Also, Purdue OWL, OWL, online writing lab is what it stands for. Always has some good references for citations of all different types of styles for the most common citations. So let's start with that. Um, we are going to talk today about APA 7 and then conventions for using and citing sources. We are not going to do the practice. It's a little bit hard when we're in an online or hybrid session, but I'll still take you through the examples. Um, and then I'll ask you like, did you learn anything from me? So is there anything that you have questions about for using the source, or do you know nothing about it? And instead of writing, since we're so small, you can just talk. So that's how we'll start, because I want to start by thinking and talking a little bit.
And if you guys want to just unmute and talk, that's fine. Or put it in the chat, it's okay as well.
Um, So I used MLA growing up. It's the only thing that I was taught to use like all the way through like high school.
Mhm.
So I think that like one of my main questions is like looking at APA and MLA, like is there really like what are the big differences? Because I'm supposed to be writing an APA, but I'm just kind of like, well,
Mhm. Yeah, good question because they all most high schools do teach exclusively MLA because you're usually using citations in humanities type courses, which are the type of courses that use that citation system. So MLA tends to highlight the authors and the titles of things, whereas APA highlights they highlight the recency of citations. So the date is going to be closer up in a full reference list. You're not going to see first names used in the reference list because they want to kind of keep it gender neutral to try to keep away any bias. And also the titles are capitalized differently. And then, so the big thing in citations, at least, is things are mixed around with a little bit different punctuation. When it comes to writing in APA style, it's a little bit more detached. So you're not using, in a lot of the fields, you're not using first person. You're highlighting the information more than your own experience. There are some exceptions, but they try to, it's used in the sciences, so it's trying to be more objective. So, any other questions or thoughts? No?
one
All right.
other thing, because
Yeah.
I do have two English minors, so with those, would I still be using MLA, like if I do research or anything with those, and then for APA just for psychology?
So it's probably, it depends on your instructor. If they don't tell you what citation style to use, you can ask, or you can, or a lot of times they'll say you can choose. Um, yeah, but it does depend on your instructor because we have a lot of graduate assistants here who also teach first year writing, and they've started using APA in their writing 121 classes because they have to look at it so much here. But really, they should be using MLA because that's more attached to the humanities. So. But yeah, it can be different every time. That's why I say always try to look it up. We have resources even here in the Writing Center if you need to come in and borrow a book. I had someone just a couple weeks ago like come in and just sit down at one of our tables with an APA 7 book and start drafting her reference page because she didn't have access. Like she didn't like using the online version, so she would rather have a paper book. So,
Yeah.
yeah. Okay. All right, let's get started. So let me tell you that APA stands for American Psychological Association. So psychology is a good one to use for APA. And it is the best online source for learning the conventions, which is what I was talking about a little bit earlier. And so one of the things that you probably know this, but I'm going to give you a review anyway, is like how to use these sources ethically and effectively. Um, there are three ways that I mentioned that are typically used sources in a research paper, and usually paraphrasing, summarizing, or direct quote. And so paraphrasing and summarizing are very similar. Um, However, they deal with different chunks of information. So a paraphrase is the author's ideas rephrased in your own words. That's when you're trying not to quote, you're trying to get the same idea across, so you're trying to write it differently. And I'll give you some pointers on how to do it other than switching out a word or two, because um, sometimes that gets a little too close to plagiarism. But the summary, it sounds like it's the same because it says author's ideas in your own words, but it's condensed because a summary is usually going to be a much bigger chunk of information. So maybe an entire article that you're taking down into just one paragraph or two paragraphs. So you're condensing it a lot, just pulling out the most important parts of it and giving a summary of it. Whereas the paraphrase is probably going to be similar in length to the original. Okay, so those are the differences between those two. Those are the most common in APA citations. So you want to use those more than direct quotes. Some people even say don't use quotes at all. In APA 7, it is 5 or more exact words in the exact order that you have to have quotation marks around, and that is considered a direct quote. So you want to make sure that if you have 5 or more exact words, then you are using those quotation marks around them. And sometimes it's even just like 1 or 2 words if it's an important phrase that somebody has come up with and like has called something. And it's so if you're using their phrase or their term for something, then you can also use quotation marks. I would say use them, cite it the first time that you are introducing the phrase. And then if you use it again, you wouldn't have to keep using the quotation marks necessarily, but what I would do usually is maybe italicize it to show that I'm using this borrowed phrase as I keep going. And if your instructor doesn't like italics, then I think that you'd still be okay using it going forward without citing it every single time. And one thing to say, I will say, is feel free to interrupt me anytime you have questions. Okay, so let's talk about how to do a paraphrase. So with a paraphrase, like I said, you're trying to get across the author's word, like author's idea or the author's information, but in your own words rather than quoting. So this is what you would do if you wanted to quote, but you think, okay, I'm not supposed to use a lot of quotes. It isn't said in a way that I just cannot match. Like I can say this, but mix it up. So you want to capture that specific point from the original text and retain the ideas, not the words themselves. So what I would say to do, and it's just what they talk about on this slide, is put away after you've like read it, you know you want to talk about it, you know you want to put it in your paper, put away the original source. If it's on paper, flip it over. If it's on your screen, then open a screen that is like covering it up so you can't see it, and then try to write out the idea in your own words. I would then go back, like you can do a couple of things. You can change the sentence structure, change the words, but sometimes if you just like switch out a word or two, it still seems like it might be plagiarized if it doesn't read like you. So one of the things that you want to do is make sure it doesn't sound like it's coming from a different source than your own writing. Does that make sense? So when I'm done trying to write it out in my own words, then I would go back, read it again and see, am I close enough? I mean, farther enough away from the original source, but still having the same idea. And did I capture the idea well, right? And if not, if it still is like, oh, I read it too much and I only switched out one word, then I would try variations on it, like maybe changing the sentence structure, changing some more words, double check to make sure you don't have 5 or more words in order, okay? And then after that, with a paraphrase, you do have to cite the author and the year. And when you're doing an in-text citation in APA format, we will look at this in a little bit, but you do have to have it in parentheses with the author's last name, comma, and the year of publication. You end the parentheses and then you end the sentence with the period. So the in-text citations always go in the sentence, not before the period. Okay. Are there questions on how to paraphrase? Okay. All right. So I said the summary is a little bit different. Instead of taking an idea or a small chunk of information, you're taking a much bigger passage. So the idea here is you want people to understand the passage that you are summarizing. So in this sense, you want to pick out the key or distinctive points. Okay, so maybe if it's an article, what is their thesis? Like what is their main argument? So, and how do they, what evidence do they use to support their argument? So those are things that might be key distinctive points that you're including here. So you want to capture that, the gist of the argument, okay? And usually when you're summarizing something, you omit your own opinion in the midst of the summary. You could then argue against it or for it afterward using your own evidence, but you would probably want to admit the opinion in the middle of summarizing it, right? So summarize it and then put in your own opinions or evidence or research, which actually the evidence and research matter more than your opinions. And then you also want to include the author's name and date and year of publication. So you're citing it again. There is a way to do in-text citations without the parentheses in APA 7 as well, if you're mentioning the author within the sentence. So we'll look at an example of that as well later. And then you could say like so-and-so finds, so-and-so argues, so-and-so questions, so-and-so explains. So if you're doing an in-text citation this way, then you're using a rhetorically accurate signal verb to tell to start the summary. Okay. It'll be more clear when we actually look at one. So, okay. All right, so as far as in-text citations, let me just say, like I already said, so I'm getting ahead of myself here. When you get to APA style, and this is summary, paraphrase, or in-text citations, authors and publication dates are cited. This is in text, also on the references page. Those are going to be up front, because in APA 7, when it comes to dates, if it's considered too old for your field, then it's not really as credible as something that's newer, because it's a scientific field and the theory is that we keep advancing. I don't know if it's actually a theory. We keep advancing scientifically. And so it's assumed that something more recent is also more relevant and more credible because it builds on the research that came before. So credibility and currentness are valued and should be transparent. The authors and where they're from also make a difference. So if you just pull a random article off the internet and you don't know anything about the author, but you're citing them, then that's not going to be as credible as someone that published in a peer-reviewed journal. So had to submit it, get several people to read it, and then have to do revisions and get it back. So that type of credibility is important as well.
I think that's important to note that too, because if you find things off the internet, it could be an opinion piece, versus a person's perspective versus being something that's vetted as true. Then that's why it's important that you try to use scholarly articles, those that are peer reviewed, because you know that information has been vetted to be true and not just someone's opinion. And if you use primary sources, those that are from the author, it gives you at least more firsthand experience, because the further you get out, the further interpretation can be given and can slant how information is presented.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and you got to be careful too, because not everything I mean, in journals, depending on the journal, they might, if you got to look at the section it was published in, because there might
Right.
be like some type of an opinion type section. So
Mm-hmm.
shorter articles that are not actually based on research, but like, they're saying their opinion, like maybe reviewing something that
Mm-hmm.
so, which it's still published, but it might not be as credible as the actual research. Okay. So this you might have even seen before. I might have done it last time. This goes for anything, summarizing, paraphrasing, or direct quotes. But you want to cite anything that you didn't know before or that didn't come from you, or that's not common knowledge. That's something that we don't have. Well, yes, we do have it in there. It's just not in the green box. It's in the other box. So if it's an idea you hadn't heard of before, even if it's not um, like just the direct words, ideas count, right? Theories count. So anything that you didn't know before and that didn't come from you needs to be cited. Data gathered by someone else. This is something I used to see all the time when I taught in a college of engineering, that people would cite these numbers and forget to tell where the numbers came from because they're in a table or something. And it's like, you still need to tell us who came up with these numbers and where they were published, right? Because I'm not just going to believe any data that you put out there, because how do I know you didn't just stick in numbers that suit you? Or if I'm seeing that it again came off of a Google search and it was just a random article that you chose, then I might question the data. So you do need to make sure that you tell where that data is coming from. Sometimes people forget to put in citations when they mention dates, like in the 1980s, this happened. Okay, how do you know that? Tell me.
Mm-hmm.
So when someone that's a reader, especially if they're skeptical, comes to your writing, um, they're going to ask, like, how do you know that? How can I trust this information? So that's why you need to have those citations in there. Visual materials is another one that is often left off of citations. And so that's something to think about. If you're borrowing an image and it's not, oh, what's the license? There are some licenses that are like free to use, like without citations, then that's fine. But most things are copyrighted and you would need to know to be able to cite that then in order to use it legally. All right, so here is a table, and this is taken right from the APA 7 website that shows basic in-text citation styles. Okay, so one thing that we haven't talked about yet is a parenthetical citation versus a narrative citation. I mentioned them, but I did not name them. So when it comes to parenthetical citations, that is when you don't have any information about the author or the date it was published in the text. You're just focusing on the information. That's when you put everything in a parentheses, and it's not always at the end of the sentence. It's after the information that you have provided. Okay. So you put in your paraphrase. Sorry, I was confusing the word parenthetical with paraphrase. You put in your paraphrase of the information, but you want to continue the sentence and explain a little bit. You will put that parenthetical citation right after your paraphrase before you start your own explanation. That way, people will know You're saying, this is the information that came from there, and this next part is mine. And then you would end the sentence after your own part. Now, if you're doing a narrative citation, that is when you mention the author in the text. So Luna argues, but right after Luna's name, you put in the year so that your readers know that I'm citing this next part. Okay. And so you're always putting the name and the date together here. Okay. Now, one of the ways that you synthesize, and what that means, just like, hey, you know what? I read these two different articles. I'm sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. This is two authors in one, two authors of one article. Okay. So if your article has two authors, then you don't use a comma between them or anything. You just use the ampersand. And notice it's always last names. Even if the article is published with first names, you're just using last names. So Salis and I can't say that, Augustina. I'm like, I'm wanting there to be a U in there. Okay, so you put the two names together with an ampersand, comma, year, and the parentheses. Okay. So this, I think, is probably one of the most useful slides that you'll see. I will send this slide deck so that you can have like copies of the notes.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So I think that this is one of the useful ones because you'll be able to come back to it and be like, okay, really quickly, yes, that's who it is. Now, if you have 3 or more authors for APA 7, you can use the et al. So you don't have to name all of the authors. 3 or more is the limit. So et al, period, comma, for the in-text citations, and then just the period before the year for the narrative citation. Okay. There are group authors. A lot of times I would get questions from students like, this doesn't have an author listed, so what should I do? Well, who's publishing it? And usually that would indicate that it's a group author or an organizational author. Okay. And so like this, the National Institute of Mental Health would be a credible source just because of the organization itself. And so that is listed as the author. If they've published something on their website and they don't have an individual's name attached to it, you just revert to them being the author. Okay. And there are sometimes possibilities for using the abbreviation, like in here. Were you asking a question? Oh, no, you're just doing okay.
Question, I do have a question though. Yes, Rhonda. What if they find something that's written in an article, but it's cited by someone else and they want to quote that? Do you recommend that they quote it as in their article or to go back to the original article and quote the original author?
I would go back to the original. Yeah. It's always better to go back to the original because you don't know if the person who is citing the other person does it accurately. I mean, you can do this as cited in this, and I don't have an example of that, but I think that would be like if it's something where you can't get back to the original for some reason.
Okay.
But it's always best to go to the original author instead of taking someone else's word for what they said. Right?
I agree.
That's kind of like the gossip chain.
Right.
Like so said this, and then it gets changed, Yeah. One thing I will say about group authors is there is a list in APA 7 manual of like the accepted ones where you don't actually have to write it out the first time. Maybe I'm not looking at it right now. So one off the top of my head, I might say the FDA might be one of them because you hear them named FDA more than you hear, what does it even stand?
The Food and Drug Administration.
Yeah. You
Yeah.
don't hear it spelled out as much as you
Yeah.
hear the FDA. So some of them you don't even have to have the full name at first. There's a list of accepted ones in the back of the APA 7 manual. Okay. Yeah, and then there's some group authors that you don't end up abbreviating. You don't need the abbreviation. It's just helping you to shorten things in your text. Okay.
So Rhonda, what do you suggest if within the same paragraph, there's a number of, we'll do paraphrases? Do you repeat the author after each one, or because it's in the same paragraph, you just list it one time? How would you address that?
Well, you want to you definitely have to use it after the first time. And I think that it really depends on well, are you using more than one author in this paragraph, right?
The same author.
One citation, I mean.
Yep.
Like if
Oh, yes. So more than one citation, but we're thinking paraphrasing versus direct.
right. If you're paraphrasing and you use it first, I would make sure that through signal words that it's clear whether you're continuing with their ideas or your own. And
Okay.
if you're not sure that it's clear, then stick it in again. It's always best to have it cited. So there's no question, like, than to leave it off. I would say,
Okay.
Aaron, if you're not sure, just put it in again. But the one thing you wouldn't want to do is just wait till the end of the paragraph and stick one citation in at the end. That's what I've seen a lot of. If there's any chance that someone is going to ask, where is this information from, or how do you know this, then you probably need a citation.
Okay.
Would you agree with that?
Yes, I think so.
Right.
Whenever there's a question, I think it's better to put it in. And so it may seem that it's kind of excessive, but I'd rather have that than it to not reflect the direct citation of who the idea came from. Yeah,
Right, right. And hopefully you're using multiple sources.
exactly.
So you'd have to say which one you're using anyway. Because if you just go one source per paragraph to the next source to the next source, then that's more of that's not really synthesizing your ideas. So what that means is taking all these different authors and like realizing that some of them agree, some of them disagree, and then using them all together and having your own ideas, but using them as support. It's kind of more of a like doing that is kind of more almost like more of a review of what other people are saying without analyzing it and putting it together in your own ideas.
Mhm.
And that's what I used to do all the time before I learned how to do this. So if you've done that before, don't feel bad. Okay. All right. So here are some examples that you can look at of the paraphrase. And I'm showing you both narrative and parenthetical citations. And so you use the remember the author surnames, and those are the ones in the pinkish color. I hope everyone can see this. I know
Uh-huh.
if you're colorblind, it might might be a little hard. And then the green is the year. So the narrative citation for this starts off with the author's name. Hernandez is 2009 for the year. That's all you do. And then findings showed. So we've got that signal word in there, but it's after findings. So it's just showed. Okay. And so that's good. And then the other one just states what Hernandez showed. Developing a nursing philosophy statement helps build critical thinking skills and increase nurses' confidence in their learning. It just states the idea rather than mentioning the author at all. that's why we put then everything in parentheses and then have the period following that. Okay. So when it's a direct quote, you're also using author surnames, the year, and the page number if you have one. I know a lot of sources now don't have page numbers because they might be online.
Mhm.
So, they used to say do the paragraph number if it was online. I think that's a thing of the past. Like,
Oh, okay, yeah.
But if people want you to do that, you would have to count the paragraphs
Mhm.
and say, instead of P period, it would be PARA period. Okay. So, and this is according to, and we have a multiple author here, LeBrog et al. So it's more than 3 authors with, again, the year and a comma. And then we have the quote in quotation marks with the page number following the quote, if you have one. Okay. So you're separating out the page number from that and then the period. Now, if this is, I assume we don't have a 40-word quote here. It looks kind of long. If it's 40 or more words, it's supposed to be a block quote. Do you know what a block quote is? Okay, so you don't use those quotation marks. Instead, you enter and you put it in indented on both sides by 1/2 inch without quotation marks. Okay, and that's to show it's a quote. You would still end with the page number, but you would put it after the period. That's like the only thing here. And that's just setting it off to say this entire chunk of text is a quote. Are there questions about that? Usually you're not going to quote something for that's that long.
And so if we move this quote, let's say, for example, this was 40 words. If we move this into a block quote, then how would this look different?
Let me see here. Let me do it really quick. Right. Okay, let me just invent the whole thing.
Yeah, if it let you do the whole, it might.
Maybe it will if I do it this way. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Except it would also be indented on the other side
Mm-hmm,
from the margin. I don't think I'm going to be able to do that in here,
mm-hmm.
but this would be a block quote. I'll just put that in there and I'll send you this version of it. So it would, and then you would continue your paragraph, even if you were like continuing a sentence, like
Mm-hmm.
from the according to blah, blah, blah. Then you could continue a sentence, although it's kind of awkward to do that after more than 40 words, right? You would continue your paragraph, um, however you want to continue on. Um,
Yeah, so visually you'll see how it's just slightly different. But this is how direct quotes are done when they're 40 words or longer in APA 7.
right. And it's very similar to what you do in MLA. So if you've ever done that in MLA, it's pretty much the same thing. Okay. And it was letting me see people before and now it's not. So if anybody wants to talk, just feel free to. Let's see. Oh, there, I got it back. Okay. Questions? All right. Okay, and then it's showing the same thing, but we're putting the citation in the parentheses instead. LeBrog et al., comma, year, comma, page. So one of the things about APA 7 is many times different types of information are going to be separated either by commas or periods, depending on like they group it together. So they've got all of the author, year, page numbers together. When we get to the reference list, there'll be different things that are together, and I'll kind of point those out. Okay. If you're citing multiple sources at once, there's the way that you do it is you put them in alphabetically by the last name of the first author and the source. And then you separate them by semicolons. So we have the first, which is a parenthetical citation. We have Albright et al. 2024 is one source with a semicolon. Gibson 2021 is another source. Wexwood and Smith 2019 is the third source. So that's all you do. And this indicates that all three of those sources had mixed results of the same type of study. Because that's what we are saying. Studies of reading in childhood have produced mixed results. So you name those three studies of reading in childhood that you're talking about. If you ever say something like studies show, you need to tell us which studies you're talking about. That's one thing that I've seen a lot. Which studies or scholars show or people or anything that like so somebody says this, well, who says it? We want to know that. If you're using authors' names for multiple sources, you can do it the same way in as a narrative as well. Although I would say try to keep authors' names out unless they're like the better known authors, or for some reason it's important to say who said this, like and highlight it in the sentence. Usually, the more important information is going to be the information itself rather than who the authors were. Okay. Because you're highlighting what they found. If they're well known, if they're someone that is always cited in this type of study, then that's a good reason to use them at least once in the sentence. But I wouldn't do it frequently. All right. So we are going to the reference lists. Did you want to talk about in-text citations at all or ask questions before we go to the reference list?
Let's see. Are there any questions at this point? We
And
can
like
move forward. Yeah.
And like I said, you want to always use a reference, like use something. And so you can use these slides. Or you
Mhm.
can use APA 7, there's books. Yeah. Okay. So here is a typical reference list. APA 7 is always formatted using double spacing. Okay. And so they're also, just like MLA, going to go in alphabetical order using the first author's last name. So you don't change around the order of the authors in articles or your sources. You list them in the order that they're published in, but you do take the first name listed and alphabetize your list by that. Does that make sense? Because you don't want to, like, for this Bader, you don't want to, oh, Uzili is before Kaplan, so I'm going to switch those. Usually people, when they publish things, it's based on, the order of the authors is based on one of two things. The first author is either the person that did the most work, or if they're not known at all, like maybe if it's a graduate student and their professor helped a little bit, their professor might have the first name on it. That's what my professor wanted to do, which is why I didn't publish because he didn't do well. To be perfectly honest, I did not publish because of that. So there are, yeah, so you want to do alphabetical order by first name. This is what it looks like. I have URLs listed there too. Hopefully they still work. I started to have some problems with tiny URLs, so I stopped using it. But the other thing to think about is instead of calling works cited, it's called references.
Mhm.
And it does start on a new page. So when you're at the end of your paper, you insert new page, or insert page break, and then you start your references on the next page. You don't want to continue it on the last page. So here's what it looks like. And I'm going to break down the components they have on you. But if you notice, within the authors, like the first, I'll just go to the next slide. The first component is the authors for APA 7 citations, okay? Use the author's name, last name, and initials. And one thing that I did not do here, and that I just realized, it's more than 3 authors, yet, hey, I've listed all of them. You don't,
Mhm.
because it's more than 3 authors, you could say et al. But what if these, like, most of these authors had like published a couple of things together, but one was left out. You could put up like, you could put more authors in it. I think the old rule was 5 people. I'm not sure. But one thing I want to point out here is that the information is all separated by commas. Okay. You're not using anything beyond the last name or surname, some people call it. Okay. The last item is separated with an ampersand. So you use that ampersand instead of the word and. And then once you're done with the authors, you put a period. You don't have to double the period since it's an initial, you just put the period. So it's saying, here are all my authors, period. After every type of information, you're going to put a period unless it's closely related to the last one. Or the URL, because that could mess up people going to the thing. Okay. So then you have the year 2019 in parentheses, just like in in-text citations with a period. Okay. Now, one thing you're not used to probably for the title of the article is that they're using sentence capitalization instead of title capitalization. So in sentence capitalization, you capitalize it just like you would if it were part of a sentence instead of like a title. So it's only first words, proper nouns, and yeah, first words and proper nouns that are capitalized. And that after that colon is the subtitle. And so that's considered a first word, the word after the colon. So you have emotions in storybooks, colon, a comparison of storybooks. And it goes on, and we have the United States capitalized since that is the yeah, the proper noun. Sorry, couldn't remember the word.
Mhm.
Okay. And you end with a period because that's the end of the title. Okay. So it's nice when you know, like, okay, every distinct piece of information is separated by a title. Every closely related piece of information is separated by a period. Every closely related piece of information is separated by a comma. Oops. Why did it? Oh, sorry. This is just what I was talking about. I forgot that the slide was in here. I was thinking that it was going to be this slide now. Okay. So then you get to the journal title. Now, journal titles do use title capitalization, unlike article titles. So you want to italicize that. And you have the title capitalization. And then after that, you're going to tell more about this journal, which is why you have a comma after it. Okay. So next is going to be the volume number, if there is one, of the journal. Sometimes there's not one, but if there is one, you use the volume number and that's still going to be italicized. And guess what? APA is weird this way. They do not want you to put a space after the volume number. And they do not want you to continue with the italics. So you have to make sure that you're paying attention to that. One thing I'll tell you right now is if you use those automatic citation systems that help you cite things, then you're going to have to change the formatting because they'll put it in however it was in the original, or they're not going to correct the formatting for you. So you might have to change the italics. You might even have to change the title, like capitalizations. And you're going to have to double check the punctuation and the spacing. Just they can help, but you want to just make sure that everything's the same because you don't want your reference list having like 3 different fonts being used or different
Right.
sizes of fonts.
Mhm.
And one thing I will say too is that these should be double spaced, but there's not really room to use them double spacing on these slides, which is why I'm not showing it double spaced. Okay, next is if there is an issue number, there's an issue number. If there's not one, you just don't include it. You put the issue number in parentheses, not in italics. And again, we're still continuing on with information about the journal, so you're using a comma. And then you go on to the page numbers that the article is in. Usually there are going to be page numbers for peer-reviewed journals, even if they are online. And sometimes they use like continued pagination throughout the year. So the page numbers might seem really high. Like they might start like with their January issue having page 1 and their December issue having page, I don't know, like 500 or something like that. But you just want to have those page numbers with a hyphen in between them. And then if there is one, you need to include a DOI. So this is stands for Digital Object Identifier. It is something that is supposed to never change. So you can always use this number to find the article online. And you want to do it in hyperlink format if available, since so many things are digital now. That way somebody could click on it and just go to the article. One thing you want to watch out for is if you're getting articles from the library, they'll add something a lot of times for eMish to try to make you go through the eMish library to get to it. So you don't want to do that. Instead, go to the article itself and like usually on the bottom of many of the articles that you'll like, if you go into the article, usually on the bottom of the pages or somewhere on the bottom of the first page or somewhere, if they have a DOI, it'll be listed and you can put that in and then test the hyperlink. So it's going to be usually doi.org/ and then have a 10 point something or some numbers and then another slash with the rest of whatever. Okay. If they don't have one, that's when you you link the where you found it. And so maybe it's the apa.org website, or you're probably not going to cite them, but whatever website you're using, you wouldn't have to use like the 3-line string of the website if it's really long, but cut it off to where people can like go to the website, maybe search the website for the article name and then come up with it. So cut it off where it's easy to get to and then go on and find it. Okay. Sometimes things pop up like a PDF on itself, like a link directly to a PDF, and you might want to like follow the link back, like start cutting off after the slashes to see what website is this actually on, if it's a super long PDF. Does that make sense? And one thing to say is there is a hanging indent. So you do want to use that hanging indent of half an inch on each of your references. And that is all I have for you. So are there more questions, or was this helpful, or like, because I can talk more about questions. I use APA for my dissertation. So
Can I just provide some clarification?
yeah.
So it pays 7 for the author count and the references. It says to include authors for if there's up to 20 authors, and then if it exceeds 20 authors, then you use the first 19 and put an ellipsis.
Wow.
Okay. So I will change that in our slides. Thank you.
Okay.
Up to 20. In the references, they want up to 19.
Yeah, so 20, and then if the count exceeds 20, then you put 19 with an ellipsis after the
Okay.
last
Okay.
author, yeah. But
Okay.
that probably
I'm
only
sorry.
pops up for like medical
I would
papers.
imagine, yeah, that's a lot of
So they
authors.
don't use at all?
No, not in the references.
Okay. Ellipses. Okay. All right. Thanks.
Okay.
I don't think anyone has ever caught that. And we teach mostly nursing with this one. So maybe, you know what? I'm wondering if the nursing instructors made it up to 3. That might be
Oh,
why.
it could be, yeah.
Because this is the one we use for nursing. They probably don't want 20.
I would imagine.
But yeah, that's a good, thank you. I'll make a note of that because we're in the process of, we've found that some people were customizing like 1 or 2 slides for several different classes. And so we're trying to like, okay, wait, like we can't have 5 versions of the same thing or 20 versions of the same thing. Let's figure out how to get it back down. So that might be why this happened.
Mhm.
Other,
So
Go ahead.
Maya or Amari, do you have any questions? I know this is a lot of information, but it's gonna be super helpful once you actually start writing and need to cite. It's always great to go back and to look at how things are done. And I use Owl Purdue, it's amazing. Because as things change, it really is a nice resource to kind of go to. And just to mention, I know in some journals, even though there may be articles that are formatted to one type, there may be standard formatting within that journal that may not be common within the formatting style that you're using. So both Amari and Maya, you'll notice that, right now you've got the opportunity to do an introductory paper, but as you guys transition to next year and are preparing to write journal articles for the McNair Scholars Research Journal, in there we have a formatting template that'll tell you this is how we want our headings or our subheadings, which may veer slightly from what the typical APA standard is, but that's so that there's uniformity among articles within the actual journal. So that's something to think of too, that there are sometimes variations just based on what you're writing for, even if within your article you're still using a certain formatting type. And so are there any questions for Dr. McCaffrey? Well, we have her here. I know it's a lot of information and it's a lot of content, but it really is good to have a basic instruction of how to go about doing some of these things.
And one thing I
Well,
will say, oh, sorry, Maya, go ahead.
no, I can't think of any questions. This was really helpful though.
Oh, thank you. Well, one thing I will say is that I think about 60% of our business comes from nursing, which means we are constantly doing APA 7. So
Yeah.
almost anyone you come to is going to be very good at APA 7. And in fact, we have added filters to our scheduling system so that you can choose APA 7 only. So if you want to double check your citations and your formatting and stuff like that, that's very common, and almost anybody will be very good at helping you with that. I say almost just because some are still kind of intimidated by it. If they they're not used to using it themselves. But yeah, you're welcome to come and see us about that or anything about your papers.
Awesome. And again, Rhonda's with the Writing Center. And so feel free to schedule an appointment to have any of your materials looked over for this or for other classes. Be sure the Writing Center is a resource that's available. And you may as well use it since your tuition dollars are being put to work by those that are there. So we want to thank Rhonda for being with us today. And we've got the link to the Writing Center in the chat. Both Amaya and Amari, I want you guys to hold on for a little bit. And we'll just give a round of applause for Rhonda for being with us today. Again, thank you so much for helping our scholars.
Okay, thank you. Have a great weekend. Sorry.
Yes, you too. Thanks so much.
Thanks.
All right, and so I am going to figure out how to stop